Good morning, I'm John Northcott. You're watching CBC News Network. We begin this morning with the latest on a major road tragedy in eastern Saskatchewan, one of the worst in Canada in recent years. Here's what we know this hour. 14 people died when a bus carrying a junior hockey team to a game collided with a semi-trailer yesterday evening. 14 others from the Humboldt Broncos bus are in hospital. 3 air ambulances helped transport them. The crash happened on Highway 35 near Tisdale, more than 200 kilometers north of Saskatoon. The CBC's Charles Hamilton joins us now from the local arena. Charles, still early there, but what can you tell us about how people are reacting to word of this tragedy?
Well, John, last night it was quite the scene here at this arena. When I arrived, there were already hundreds of people who had gathered here. You know, as I pulled up, there were people hugging, there were people crying. And, you know, throughout the evening, as people got word, you know, people got messages through social media or text messages or phone calls, word on people who died. There were just these waves of anguish that, you know, made their way through this small town. And this is a small hockey town. I think it's pretty telling. You know, I spoke to the mayor, Mr. Rob Mensch, last night. Here's what he had to say about just this tight-knit community and what hockey means.
It makes the community, I think, rally together, because there was times during that game when, you know, they were down and they came back. You know, so we're hoping to do that as a community as well. You know, we're down, but we'll come back.
So that again was Rob Mensch. He's the mayor here in Humboldt. And I wanted to share something else he said with me. I'm actually standing in the ice hockey arena where the Humboldt Broncos played. And he told me that in the immediate aftermath of this crash, when word was just trickling in, he showed up here just for no apparent reason. And dozens of other people had showed up here. And they were, when he arrived, they're basically just sitting in these stands behind me, just staring at the ice. This is a small, tight-knit hockey town, and hockey means a lot. And people have gravitated towards this arena in the wake of this tragedy.
Charles, police still looking into this crash very intently as to what the cause of it could be. What do we know at this point?
Well, we know that 14 people are dead, another 14 are injured. We know that there are people who are critically injured in hospital. So this bus was carrying 28 people, most of them obviously young people who were part of this junior hockey team, but there were also coaches, you know, other staff members aboard this bus, and they were going to a playoff game in Nipawin when they collided with a semi-trailer. Now, this happened around dinner time, so it still would have been light out here in Saskatchewan, but we don't have any word on the visibility, on the conditions. It is still winter here in Saskatchewan, so we don't know any of the conditions on the highway. I do know that in the last couple of days here in Saskatchewan, there has been windy, blowing snow conditions, but we're not sure if that played any role in the crash. And, you know, as the day goes on, we're hoping for, you know, more updates from the RCMP. We're hoping to learn more about the people involved, but also how this terrible crash happened.
This is a small community that would rally behind its team, that would know the players on the street to talk to. What kind of support are people there in the community receiving to deal with this tragedy?
Well, that was one of the most overwhelming things I've seen, you know, last night and then early this morning, is just, you know, when we arrived here, there was already grief counseling set up. You know, there were people who were, if they were having difficulties, if they were, you know, breaking down, which many of them were, obviously. You know, this is an extremely emotional time, but there were grief counselors, you know, from the health region already on site here. We spoke to a local Anglican priest. He said a group of at least 6 Anglican ministers or priests were here to help with support. Here's what he had to say.
At such a dark time tonight, this is a good thing that people come together in the time of need. They don't stay at home when they're feeling isolated and alone, but they come together as a community to talk with each other and be with each other, cry with each other. It's very healthy, and it's what we need to do.
So again, you can see that this is a community, a tight-knit community, a small hockey town coming together, and we're expecting more of that today as we learn kind of more details about not only what happened on that highway, but also just how this community is reacting to the, you know, the loss of so many young people in such a short period of time.
Charles, thanks for your work on this. The CBC's Charles Hamilton in Humboldt, Saskatchewan. The tragedy has hit home across Canada, especially in Saskatchewan. Rob Pizzo now on this. Rob, we're talking about a small community, we're talking about a team, and we're talking about a sport that feels like a family because of the way this whole league works, bringing people up from the smaller teams.
Yeah, and you look at NHLers nowadays, they get to fly on their, team planes and private jets and everything else, but they got to that point by taking the bus. So it's really hitting home for a lot of these players. So let's take a look at some of the reaction we saw on social media yesterday after the news broke of the crash. Tyler Bozak, Toronto Maple Leaf, born in Saskatchewan. So heartbreaking, sending all my prayers and love to the families and everyone involved back in Saskatchewan. Hashtag pray for Humboldt. Brooks Like, someone else who was born in Saskatchewan. Just hearing about the unfortunate event regarding the Humboldt Broncos, I'm at a loss for words, but send every ounce of love I have to the individuals and families involved with the hashtag prayers for Humboldt. Haley Wickenheiser, of course, multi-gold medalist, born in Saskatchewan. We are all here for you. Whatever, whenever, pray for Humboldt. And Ken Hitchcock, the head coach of the Dallas Stars, who played last night, said this after the game.
Our hearts go out to the players and their families of the Humboldt Broncos, and not sure where it's at right now, but that overrides anything that a hockey game had. So that's a tough situation for everybody in Saskatchewan, and we feel for them.
I think Ken Hitchcock said it right there, John. It really takes a back seat. Sports just don't seem important today, obviously, when you have a tragedy like this.
I've lived in smaller communities, knowing how the team is, in some cases, everything, especially in long Canadian winters. But let's talk about the price that these players pay to be able to play at this level, and the travel in particular.
Well, the travel is just a way of life when it comes to junior hockey. I mean, if you're a junior hockey player, you're basically spending your time in three places: in high school, at the rink, or on the bus. I mean, this bus trip yesterday, John, was scheduled to be about 2 hours and 15 minutes. You go one way, you got to come back, 4.5 hours of travel. But many players have said that's how they become that tight-knit family. I mean, they are playing in a community of approximately 6,000 people. Everyone knows who these players are. So this is actually a little bit of their getaway as well. When they've got those long bus trips, that's where they become as tight as they are. You just look at pictures of this team and you can tell they were a tight-knit team. But it is a way of life. And I think that's why we're seeing so much of a reaction online. Obviously, it's a tragedy and condolences want to be sent out, but all of these players, from the Tyler Bozaks to the Brooks Like to everyone else we've seen, they've spent those long hours on those buses. It's really hitting home for them. We've seen, trainers and coaches say, I've spent the last 25 years on buses, so I know exactly, what that entails. And when you see something like this, this magnitude, 14 dead, 14 injured, 3 of them still listed in critical condition, obviously it hits home to a lot of players.
These players, 16 to 19 years of age, as you say, 2.5 hours each way, and in the middle, they play their hearts out.
They do.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.
Well, Matt Gorley has been following the story. He's a hockey reporter with the Dub Network, and we've reached him in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. Thanks for joining us, Matt. Can you take us through the moment when you found out about what had happened?
Yeah, we were covering a Western Hockey League playoff game in Moose Jaw, and a hotly anticipated one between Moose Jaw and Swift Current. And it was about 5:30 when news started to trickle into the press box, and it was shortly before the pregame warm-ups. And pretty quickly, everyone started to talk to each other and try and get a sense of any details we could get. Just with Swift Current being in the building and them being notable for their bus tragedy in 1986 that saw 4 players die. That was your first thought was about fatalities, and that obviously such a memorable occasion that happened many years ago, but it's never far from people's minds. And so just there's scouts and other league officials there, and everyone pretty quickly just sort of got talking. And the hockey community is small, and everyone knows people who were touched by that tragedy in '86, and then also people that knew people within the Humboldt organization. And I started looking at the roster and thinking about players that I knew, and it didn't take long to start just thinking about who might have been on that bus and how they might be doing.
Can you tell us a bit about a community like Humboldt, 6,000, that some of the players we know are from the community, but they're really from right across Western Canada. Can you talk about the importance of a team like that to a community the size of Humboldt?
Yeah, I mean, you just look at, their arena seats, I think 1,900 people, and it's a community of 6,000. That just sort of puts into perspective, I think, the importance this is to the community, and not just part of the community, but the entire community. And I heard that, when the tragedy struck, people naturally sort of congregated at the arena. It's almost a natural community hub, and I know for young players growing up in that area, being a Humboldt Bronco is a dream of theirs. They maybe dream of the NHL, but first they dream of playing for the Humboldt Broncos, and young kids look up to those players, and it's something that Humboldt's got a great sporting tradition with various things, but obviously the Broncos is one of the things they're most known for, and have had a lot of success for over the decades for what's a pretty storied franchise in the SJHL.
We're also hearing, of course, from the NHL community as well. People who are from Saskatchewan, players who are from Saskatchewan, but really anyone who is in the NHL has had this experience of those long wintertime bus rides on dark roads. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, it's part of a rite of passage, and it's just you take it for granted. And talking to players last night a little bit after the game, I mean, it's in the back of your mind that something could go wrong, and I think most people have some sort of close call story where it was bad weather and visibility was bad, or the roads were icy, and and things ended up fine. But with stories that you hear, certainly the Broncos being Saskatchewan Broncos being such a notable one, it's not too far from people's minds that it can be dangerous. You spend that much time on the highways in the winter hours and traveling long distances, especially here in Western Canada. You just never know. And like last night, I mean, it seemed like a clear day, and it wasn't. Some teams travel 12, 15 hours. 2.5 hours is a relatively short trip by junior hockey standards, but you just never know.
I understand that you spoke to a first responder at the scene. What did you learn there?
I didn't speak to. I was in communication with someone that I was in a wedding party with a number of years ago, who I don't know terribly well, but I was speaking to his sister, and he was pretty shooken up. He's from Nipawin. He's a firefighter, and so just initially, I was trying to get a sense of how serious it might be, and she sent me a message saying that he was there and he was having a tough time dealing with things, and it was pretty bad. And so that's sort of when I knew this was going to be certainly fatalities, but even still, when you hear 14 late last night, that was still pretty shocking to hear that severity, certainly for this accident.
Matt, how can the community itself, the community of Humboldt, and then the wider hockey community, how can they begin to move forward and join together over this?
I think you're seeing that already, as far as people offering help and sending condolences, and I think there'll be various things done to help the community if there's anything that the community needs. I think anyone in the the junior hockey community within Western Canada is definitely willing to help. There was places set up. You're hearing people opening their houses to anyone that needs to come in that area. For the short term, in a hockey sense, I think it's going to be tough for everyone to if games do continue, certainly at the SJHL level, to see what happens. But I think moving forward, looking ahead to next season, I think the community will really rally around the franchise and make sure that there is a hockey team there next year. And it's such an important part of the community. I think it'll make the community, stronger. Unfortunately, it's a tragedy that will do it, but it's already a tight-knit community. But I think, as you saw in Swift Current, it's been something that's always been tied to the team, and preserving that memory of the 4 players that died in Swift Current. I think we'll see very similar push within Humboldt to keep the memory of these young players that have passed away in people's minds, and make sure that they're always honored. And it's a special part of hockey in Humboldt, many years in the future.
We have heard from the president of the Humboldt Broncos. In fact, we heard from him this morning, him confirming that there will be a press conference later this afternoon with some statements about what happened. We also heard earlier from the team confirming that the Humboldt Broncos were involved in this accident, saying that everyone is in shock, and saying that, of course, they're devastated, extending sympathies to the families. Let's hear more from the president of the Humboldt Broncos.
I'm trying to find out the information on every kid, every adult who's in that bus. Absolutely. I mean, all these kids are like family. We're a small community. We are just, of course, in utter disbelief and shock at the loss that that's fallen upon us.
Now, the president of the Broncos there says that this is a small community. He says that he knew every single one of those players, and in fact, he's been billeting one of the players personally in his own home. So certainly there's a lot of shock and devastation within the team, people who knew the team. And with that kind of grief often also comes a desire to help, to do what people can to help the community through this time. And we saw somebody set up a GoFundMe page, a woman who says that she's a resident of Humboldt, and she has already raised on that page more than $60,000 in a very short time period. She says that money will go directly to the families involved, and she says, in fact, she's working with GoFundMe to make sure that that money gets to the families appropriately, and also she's been in contact with the Humboldt Broncos management. John.
Okay, what else are we hearing, though, from the local community and, of course, beyond that as well?
Well, we heard from the mayor of Humboldt saying that this is horrifying. The community is hit hard. We heard from the Premier of Saskatchewan, Scott Moe. He said words cannot describe the loss that we feel tonight. Last night, the news I've heard is difficult to comprehend, calling Saskatchewan one community at the core, that they're all a small town, neighbors, friends, and family. So he's saying the whole province really is hit by this. We also heard from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau saying he can't imagine what the parents are going through. Trudeau, a parent himself, saying his heart goes out to everyone affected by the terrible tragedy.
The father of Broncos player Derek Patter, who survived the crash, shared an image of his son and teammates recovering in hospital. He tweeted the photo with the caption, "Derek, Grayson, and Nick bonding and healing in hospital." Many families have gathered together for support as they wait for news on their loved ones. Officials of the Humboldt Broncos plan to hold a press conference about the tragedy at 1 p.m. local time today. In the meantime, President Kevin Geringer has released a short statement saying this: "Our community is in utter shock, and we're trying our best to come to grips with this unimaginable tragedy." Many people are reacting to the crash on social media. Toronto Maple Leafs forward Taylor Bozak, who was born in Regina, Saskatchewan, is taken to Twitter today to say the following: "So heartbreaking. Sending all my prayers and love to the families and everyone involved back home in Saskatchewan." There's also political reaction. Andrew Scheer said the following on Twitter this morning: "Terribly sad to learn of the crash involving the Humboldt Broncos tonight," referencing that it occurred last night. "Our prayers are with the loved ones and those lost and injured and everyone touched by this terrible tragedy."
While many inside are still struggling with why this happened, an RCMP forensic report is painting an ugly picture of how it happened. Jaskirat Singh Sidhu passed 5 signs warning of an intersection before blowing by a stop sign and into the path of the Humboldt Broncos bus. The impact tore the bus into 3 pieces while both vehicles rolled before coming to a rest. Personal belongings and 2 flatbed trailers worth of peat moss were scattered across the road. While Sidhu's semi sustained significant damage to one side, the other was virtually undamaged and the cab largely intact. Meters away, the entire front of the Broncos bus was torn off and crushed, giving those passengers no chance of survival. Though tire marks indicate driver Glenn Dirksen attempted to save the group's lives by hitting the brakes 24 meters before the impact. The report adds Sidhu could have narrowly avoided the crash if he hit the brakes 100 meters before the intersection. This clears up questions that have lingered for the past 10 months. The Broncos bus had the right of way. The sun and other environmental factors did not affect Sidhu. The nearby tree line not enough to completely obscure his view of the bus. Both vehicles were in good working condition at the time of the crash. Cami Kepke, Global News.
The driver who caused the Humboldt Broncos bus crash that killed 16 people has lost his latest bid to stay in Canada and avoid deportation to India. CTV's Bill Fortier on the rookie trucker's next steps and how the families of the victims are reacting tonight.
The tragic scene is still etched in the memory of a nation more than 5 years after the highway crash that left 16 people dead and 13 injured, most of them young hockey players. Tonight, Jaskirat Singh Sidhu, the man behind the wheel of the truck that hit the Humboldt Broncos bus, is one legal step closer to deportation.
He and his wife are very disappointed. They were hoping for a better outcome. It was not to be.
Sidhu is currently on parole. Earlier this year, the Canadian Border Services Agency and a government official recommended sending him back to India. Sidhu applied to the federal court to set aside that decision, arguing the CBSA ignored his previously clean record and relied on letters from the public pushing for deportation. The judge disagreed, saying in his decision, "I find that the processes followed by the officer and the delegate were fair, having regard to all of the circumstances."
We were glad to hear this information this morning.
For some parents of the young hockey players killed, this decision brings comfort.
We just want them to go away. We think that in our lives, that'll make our lives better.
For others still grieving, this is just another chapter in the excruciating ordeal.
While I feel sad for Mr. Sidhu here that he has to leave, but, for our family, we're just going to continue going forward.
Sidhu now has one last attempt to stay in Canada. His lawyer says he will seek to maintain his permanent resident status on humanitarian and compassionate grounds.
They have a child now, a child with very high medical needs. And so it would be extremely disruptive if he was deported.
A deportation hearing in the new year is essentially a formality. Then Sidhu will get another hearing for that application on permanent residency status. If that fails, Sidhu could be deported within a few months. Omar.
All right, Bill, thank you.